Welcome to Soccer Morning on NASN. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Jason Davis here with you on Soccer Morning on the North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. It's that day of the week when the news slows down. Right now in this part of the calendar, there doesn't tend to be too many games on the schedule. There are a couple of games on the schedule today. Fulham and Sheffield Wednesday playing a fourth round FA Cup replay. Woohoo! Sorry, Fulham fans. And Morelia down in Colombia to take on Santa Fe in a second leg match for Copa Lib. So that's your soccer today. So that means that we are going to be sort of branching out a little bit. We're going to review the Premier League weekend with Luke Moore from the world famous Football Ramble. At the bottom of the hour, 10:30. We'll talk to Andy Edwards from Kansas City about Sporting's preparations for a title defense in 2014. Preseason is underway. Teams are in the thick of it, getting ready for the new MLS season. So we'll check in with Andy. Not a lot of movement when it comes to Sporting. They haven't done much to change up their roster. They've held on to their key contributors. They're going to have to deal with some World Cup absences, or you would imagine that they will. So we're going to have to talk about all of that with Andy Edwards. And then Eric Gomez, our friend from south of the border, will talk Mexican soccer with us at 11 o'clock. And the headline story in Mexico right now is Carlos Vela, who I mentioned this at the end of the program yesterday. He has already been ruled out for the World Cup for Mexico. That's, you know what, they've managed to get here without him. Maybe they'll be fine. And I think based on the group that they're in, you can imagine them getting out. I mean, don't put it past Mexico to surprise. But Carlos Vela is a weapon. Carlos Vela makes them better. Carlos Vela has played very, very well for Sociedad. And not to have him and to have that specter of the controversy, whatever the reasons are, whatever the history is, whatever Carlos Vela's problem is, and maybe it's not just on him. Clearly, the Mexican Federation had a role to play in Carlos Vela deciding not to come back to the Mexican national team because they've changed coaches. They've changed the feeling around that team. And if Carlos Vela still says, "Oh, it's not good enough for me," or "I'm not happy," what is it? Is it a specific player he doesn't get along with? I saw Jimmy Conrad say yesterday on Twitter, maybe this is a John Terry, Wayne Bridge situation. Not direct, not exactly, but in terms of that one guy not wanting to play with that other guy. Something like that. Interesting things down there. In the meantime, our phone lines are open, 347-756-6276. We're on Twitter at Soccer Morning. Anything and everything you want to talk about, I am willing to talk about. We haven't talked about Philip Seymour Hoffman. Seems like everybody has to do that. Do we have to talk about Philip Seymour Hoffman? He never appeared in any soccer movies that I'm aware of. I don't think he appeared in any soccer. That would have been nice, because he was an amazing actor, and it's a very tragic situation. Anyway, moving along there. Actually, what I want to talk about first here today is we are on the verge. We are on the we are very, very close to something happening in Miami regarding MLS. David Beckham, Don Garber, the mayor of Miami-Dade County, all of those people are supposed to be at a press conference tomorrow morning to say something. I'm not sure we know exactly what they're going to say. I don't think anybody knows. I think it's, well, they're close to having a deal done to bring a franchise back to Miami. Okay. I think we all assume that eventually this will happen. I don't know that there's any stadium news. I haven't seen anything concrete. All we know is that Beckham has met with people and his people have met with people, and they've scouted many locations around the city of Miami. And so we've got that kind of hanging out there in the balance. And it's a question. Can Miami be successful? Because that's where we are now. It's happening, guys. It's going to happen. Whatever they say tomorrow morning, and there's some event tonight, invitation only. Some very special people and journalists have been invited to an event tonight, which sounds like, a lobbying effort. You bring in the Don, you get David Beckham there looking dapper, fresh off of his Super Bowl commercial performance, which apparently was one of the most popular Super Bowl commercials. I didn't even pay attention to the Super Bowl commercials for some fairly obvious reasons. But you get David Beckham there in one of his $3,000 suits, and you get Don Garber, and you get all of those local dignitaries in a room, and you say, you glad hand, and you have Beckham with his winning smile, and you say, hey, we really want to bring pro soccer back to Miami. I'm sorry, pro soccer MLS style back to Miami. This is what we need from you, or please help us work on this. This is a very vibrant, diverse community. We imagine it can support MLS. And so I put it to you. I put it to you, the American soccer fan, whether you remember the Miami Fusion or not, whether you believe in Miami. This is what I'm curious about. Do you believe in Miami? I'd like to hear from Miami. Do we have any listeners in Miami? 347-756-6276. I want you to lay out a case for me. I want you to tell me, because I'm skeptical, just like everybody else. I want you to tell me why Miami's going to work this time. Explain to me how we're not going to get to Miami, and maybe we have a year or two, but then things start to crumble, because I think that's the fear. And I'll say this. If you are MLS, and yes, you are beholden to David Beckham for a lot of things. He did a marvelous job just by playing here of putting MLS on the map in some way, in some nebulous, difficult to pin down way that has subsequently helped lead to where the league is now, which is mostly full stadiums, vibrant atmospheres, incredible success in Seattle and Seattle and Portland and Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, all getting in and rising franchise values. All of that is partly due in some way to David Beckham. And if you deny that, I'm sorry, you're just a hater. But if you rely solely on David Beckham, no matter how much you owe him as a league, and you don't go into this process and you don't get this team started with a solid marketing base, with a solid understanding of that market, with a solid understanding of what it will take to convince the soccer fans of Miami to show up in person. Because look, Miami has a reputation of being a great television soccer town. Go check out those ratings. Every time there's a major soccer event, Champions League final, World Cup qualifiers, anything like that, any FA Cup final, anything like that. Miami is in the top 2 or 3, 4 or 5 cities for ratings when it comes to those television events. Can you directly take that audience, say, hey, look, this is we're bringing it back. This is the Fusion Redux. We're coming for you. Come to our stadium. And it's not just David Beckham sitting in a luxury suite waving to the populace. There's got to be something else there. There's got to be something concrete. If it's superficial, if it's just Beckham and, oh, look, LeBron James is involved too. If it's just that, it's going to fail. I don't think anybody has any doubt. So there's got to be something else to this. There's got to be something real, something, and it can't even be, I'm not even sure you can take your cues from anybody else in this league. I don't even think you can take the success of those cities I mentioned, those expansion franchises I mentioned, that have set a standard, a new standard in the league, and say, well, that's what we can do in Miami. Although there are lessons, there are individual lessons perhaps from some of these towns. Look, Miami, based on the makeup of that city, is unlikely to be a European style support, right? Right? So it's not going to be Portland. It's not going to be Toronto. It's not even going to be Seattle. This is something a little bit different. Is it going to be more? I mean, look, not to draw easy parallels, and there are specific differences between cultures, and I'm not trying to whitewash that. But is this going to be more of a Houston vibe? How do you maximize that? How do you get those people involved? Do those people care about David Beckham? Anybody know? Do those people actually care? Do the soccer fans of Miami give a toss about David Beckham? I have no idea. I'm not going to assume they do. I'm not going to assume they don't. All we know right now, because look, this is also a new experience. If you are fairly new to MLS, perhaps you don't remember when franchises were placed in expansion cities without a groundswell of local support. Maybe you don't recall what happened in Utah with Salt Lake City and RSL, which was not, which was a surprise choice, which was a team that the league thought could be successful, but didn't really have any obvious reasons to think it would be. They've proven to be successful. Credit to the league, credit to RSL, absolutely. But it took a while to really believe in that market. Chivas USA, Did anybody think, oh, a second team in LA? Look, it clearly hasn't worked there. But it wasn't like there was a clamoring for a second team in LA. That was wholly on the idea of making a mini Chivas de Guadalajara. So maybe you don't remember those days, because now we've got a slew of teams coming into this league that have hit the ground running and had that base already in place. Even in Seattle. And I think it's easy to slight Seattle on this front, because they had because in USL they were playing at Starfire and they had 3,000 to 5,000 or whatever it was. It didn't feel the same way as it did in Portland, where they were already this vibrant, amazing atmosphere week in and week out with the USL Portland Timbers. But even Seattle had a base. Even Seattle had something to work from that you could say, all right, look. And the other thing in Seattle was obviously the departure of the Sonics, which helped a little bit. Vancouver, they were a vibrant USL program. Montreal, obviously. These are places where before, at Philadelphia, clearly there was a groundswell of support, whether there was a pro soccer presence or not. There was the Sons of Ben making noise, going to MLS Cup finals and singing at Red Bull fans that they had as many cups as they did. Well, I'm not sure that's where that happened, but they were singing. They were singing. They were making it clear there was something happening in Philadelphia, even if it was a couple hundred people. They got in garbage. And I know there's a movement in Miami. I know there is. And I'm not discounting the people in Miami who really want MLS to come back. I just don't see the same level of how do you explain this? I just don't see the same level. It's just, I don't know. I know on Twitter they're very active, and I'm sure I've angered some people who are in that movement. It just doesn't feel the same, and maybe that's because Beckham has kind of pushed all of that to the side. Because I don't think that do we know, is David Beckham engaging with those groups the way that MLS engaged with the Sons of Ben, the way that the eventual union ownership engaged with the Sons of Ben? Did that happen? Is that happening right now? Have they met? I doubt they've met. I haven't heard anything. There's been no reports of a meeting between the MLS and Miami crew and David Beckham's people. Where's that? Maybe that would make me feel a little bit better. So we're gonna get a team that's going to, at least on paper, look like it's being handed to David Beckham because he's got the option and because he's David Beckham. So there's some real convincing that has to be done. And look, that may not happen until a couple of years in if they get the stadium built and they have a good representation in the stands and they maintain some momentum coming out of the blocks. That's where MLS expansion sort of is right now. Maybe tapped out the pre-existing soccer community spirit thing. Maybe that's tapped out a little bit. Where else? San Antonio. But that's a fairly new team. Even Orlando. Orlando builds this team and gets an MLS club on the success of their USL Pro enterprise. But that's 3 years. And all credit to the people who showed up in Orlando and accepted that team and became fans in the thousands in purple. I fully respect, but 3 years. So maybe that's a little bit more convincing as well. Maybe Orlando's not quite there yet. People have doubts about Orlando. I think that's a little unfair. So it's definitely more unfair to question Orlando than it is Miami. So that's where we sit with this on the eve of some kind of announcement in Miami, Florida about the future of MLS. The Fusion are great in memory. Ray Hudson and that team and what they did on the field. But there are some questions about whether or not Miami is really going to be a MLS soccer team. And that's partly on MLS. I mean, that's partly an indictment of MLS. Because I'm about to talk about something that's probably going to bring out thousands upon thousands to Miami. I actually don't remember what the attendances were for the International Club Championship or whatever the heck ICC stands for last year. Last summer. I remember Ronaldo and the Pitch Invader. How many people were in the building for that at Sun Life? Because that's the other headline right now in American soccer circles as we wait for the MLS season to get going here. Teams are coming. Friendlies are happening, guys. We're excited. Are we excited? Are we excited for the ICC in 2014? Are we to the point? I've never gone out to one of these. Have not. They've been to Washington a couple times. I never felt the urge. I have no connection to any of the teams that have come around here. I don't have any real connection to any foreign team, but I know some people do. I know Americans that have formed those connections. Are we excited about the ICC? Here's your details. If you've missed this is a report by Grant Wall at SI.com. The Guinness International Champions Cup. Oh, International Champions Cup. There it is. Sorry. Will return for its second edition after a 2013 debut. These teams, and man, they're bringing some heat here. Real Madrid, Manchester United, Manchester City, Liverpool, AC Milan, Inter Milan, Roma, and Olympiacos. Yeah, you can't hate on the lineup, that's for sure. I don't know that I particularly care about any of those teams in preseason, but the Manchester United, we know what their influence here is here in the States. Manchester City obviously has an interest in the American market now. Liverpool has a lot of fans here. You got the two biggest clubs in Italy plus Roma. And Real Madrid, probably the biggest club in the world, with thousands upon thousands of fans here as well. I imagine that most of these games will sell out. Your locations: Charlotte, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, New York, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., and Miami. And I guess one more venue that hasn't been added yet. 4 team groups. Winner of each group will meet in the final at Sun Life Stadium near Miami. Now, you're going to have some of these teams hit by potential involvement in UEFA tournaments. Manchester United staring down the barrel of some UEFA Europa League matches. So there's some question there as to whether or not Manchester United will bring a solid. And look, this is preseason. That's what you get. You pay how much these tickets run? $75, $100? Am I way over? What's the cheapest ticket to an ICC game? And these are big teams. Now, remember last year, the LA Galaxy participated in this. I think they beat Juventus. Is that right? They beat Juventus last year in an ICC game. Apparently no place for an MLS team in this particular ICC. I don't know. Again, clearly wondering if there is some friendly fatigue. Maybe there's not. And look, to me, and I'm going to get back to this because I'm getting hit with some tweets right now. But to me, this is sort of what Miami's role in American soccer feels like. Now, again, I don't want to say that I don't think this is going to work. I am just skeptical. And again, not saying there isn't a movement there. I'm just not sure it's as large and as influential as it's been in some other cities. And look, the Fort Lauderdale Strikers are up the road. No longer in Miami FC. They've gone up the road, and I don't think the NASL Fort Lauderdale Strikers is going to be involved in this effort. The other fallout from this will be what does traffic do about that team? Do they maintain that team in Fort Lauderdale? But that feels like Miami's role in America, the home of summer friendlies, Miami, Florida, where 40,000 will come out to watch Real Madrid. 60,000 will come out to watch Real Madrid. Unless you put games on top of each other a couple days together, then maybe it's a little difficult to sell all the tickets. Mike McGrew on Twitter, Cincy Sporting, a well-managed, well-owned team can work in any top 20 media market. Okay. Is that based on what? Just that the population is there? I suppose. Now, I think the stadium location matters pretty significantly in Miami. We'll see about that. Here's a good point from Brian. Where is the fan movement for NYCFC? Another outlier, another team without a fan movement. I'm not going to suggest that NYCFC doesn't have some convincing to do as well. Manchester City. And before we came on the air, literally right up until airtime, Trevor and I were having a pretty excitable conversation about what NYCFC needs to do or should be doing as they prepare to enter MLS. we have $100 million investment on the part of Manchester City. What does that mean exactly? They've bought a team in the A-League. They're clearly they're putting outposts around the world. City outposts. And I don't know that there's any way that this club avoids being called City, even if Manchester City obviously wants that to happen. But sometimes it's not really up to them. Sometimes it's up to the community. It kind of filters out, and we pick what we want to call them. We're not going to call them New York. That's the Red Bulls. If we call them City, what does that mean about Orlando? I guess we call them Orlando. It is New York. But I maintain that they need to be sure in New York to establish their own identity that is separate enough from Manchester City that it can feel like New York's team. They're running this contest or a campaign, a social media campaign, My NYCFC. Go check it out, where they've given a blank template for a badge, for a crest, and they're asking fans to create one. Now, there's plenty of joke ones out there. I've seen some funny ones from Red Bull fans, and I've seen some that are critical of Manchester City's ownership when it comes to policies back in the UAE. Those things, outside of what they're looking for, obviously, but are part and parcel of these type of campaigns. There's a couple of good ones. There's one that everybody's passing around saying, if this isn't the badge, something's wrong. This one's really good. It's sort of the Empire State Building on top, and there's what bridge is that, Trevor? I want to get my New York bridges right. Probably the Brooklyn Bridge. And there's a star in the middle. It's very nice. It's very nice. But again, the question is, can they establish their own identity in New York? Do you imagine New Yorkers are just going to wholly swallow the idea of a team that looks like the little brother of Manchester City? I don't. I'm being criticized on Twitter by MLS Rumors, which is freaking rich, because I don't know enough about Miami Ultras. Hey, MLS, whatever they're called, MLS Ultras, Miami, call me. I'm here. I got a phone line. You want to make your case? I told you. Call me, make your case. If it's only certain people who know what you're doing, then you're not doing a good enough job. And I know there are limited resources. And I know that the people have shown up at meetings in Miami to lobby Don Garber. I know it's there. I know it's there. I'm more engaged than most people, and therefore I'm aware of it. But I'm also aware that you have not made your case enough if people aren't talking about you in concert with David Beckham. Maybe that's on Beckham. Maybe we should be criticizing David Beckham for lack of engagement with the MLS and Miami movement. Apparently he's been on, apparently the Miami Ultras have been on Spanish language television, which is fine. Again, I get that from a Miami context. But you can't really question doubt about Miami as a sports town, which has nothing to do with these guys. You're not going to overcome that hill. Sorry. People doubt Miami as an MLS city because it's not a great sports city by reputation. If LeBron leaves the Heat and they're not as good anymore, what happens to that team? They go back to their old ways, half-filled arenas. That's the fear. Convince me. It's on you. It's not on me to understand exactly what's going on. It's on you to convince me. No, you don't have to. You don't get to care what I think. That's fine. It's coming anyway. The team's coming. You'll have your opportunity. But again, this is an open forum. I've had people call me about St. Louis. I've had people call me about Atlanta. I've had people call me about Minneapolis, I think. Have we ever taken a Miami expansion call on this show? I don't think so. I don't think so. All right. Enough. I mean, I wish Miami luck. I want MLS to be successful no matter where it ends up. I wish Miami luck. And I'm not going to sit here in judgment and say Miami's going to be a failure. Once David Beckham stops going to games, Miami's going to be a failure. didn't say that. I'm not calling you guys out, except to make your case. If you have a problem with anything I'm saying, make a case. Let's go. As for the ICC, the International Champions Cup, I thought that we had some sort of pushback on the summer friendlies. And it felt like, at least last summer, it felt like it was a little bit of fatigue. We'll see with this. Again, this is a star-studded lineup, and I don't expect anybody to turn down the opportunity to go see their team if you are attached to United or City or Liverpool or Milan, Inter, Real Madrid. The two outliers are Roma and Olympiacos. I'm sure Roma has some fans here. In fact, I know a couple on Twitter, but I don't think they have a big presence in Olympiacos and a couple of locations. 313, you're on the air.
Hey, Jason, it's producer Isaac from Pittsburgh.
Hey, producer Isaac from Pittsburgh. What's up, man?
Yeah, so we got AC Milan and Man City coming over to Heinz Field July 27th, but yeah, I really don't think I'll be going unless I can find a good deal on tickets. And, from what I remember in the past for ICC, the games are pretty uninspiring.
Well, let's be clear. I guess it doesn't matter to the average fan. This is the second year of the ICC. Previously, it was something else, but it doesn't matter. It's just friendlies. It's just a friendly tournament. So yeah, I mean, look, I think that again, I've kind of ranted about how these events turn into. They turn into science fiction conventions for soccer fans in the end. And when you have two big teams, what you end up with is a bunch of fans showing up wearing jerseys of clubs that aren't involved. And to me, that's an odd thing. But, I guess, I don't know. I find it hard to believe that the people are so committed to a team that they're, to a team across the ocean that they need to go spend $75 on a ticket. Now, you said ticket prices aren't that bad?
Oh, I have no idea. I said I'll be going if the ticket prices aren't that, if they aren't that bad.
Right.
But, from what I remember last year, the crowds were, the crowd atmosphere was just as uninspiring as the play on the field.
Well, that's no surprise. More of a Justin Bieber type feel, I imagine.
Yeah. And, one of the most searing memories I have of the friendlies last year is when it wasn't the ICC, but in the MLS All-Star game when we presented Roma with the trophy for beating our All-Stars. They thought it was a joke.
Well, I mean, come on, look. MLS is not the only. I gotta let you go, Isaac, because I gotta get to our guest, sure. Luke Moore, here in a second. But MLS is not the only league or whatever. The only people who invite big foreign clubs over and hand them a trophy in a preseason game. It happens all over the place, and all over the place, it's a bit of a farce. But it's a common thing. It's a thing that people do. It's stupid to hand a trophy to Roma for beating the MLS All-Stars. Fine. I'm not going to criticize MLS, and I'm not even going to criticize Roma for the way that they handle it. I mean, come on. It's just a thing that happens. Let's move on. I find it. This is part of the inferiority complex that runs through American soccer fans. Oh, we're giving them a trophy, and they think it's stupid. This reflects poorly on MLS. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. On the other side of this, Luke Moore from the Football Ramble will join us. We'll talk Premier League. Don't go anywhere. Be right back. Back on Soccer Morning, joined now by our friend from the Football Ramble, Luke Moore. We'll talk some Premier League here. Hi, Luke.
Hello, Soccer Morning.
Hello. Did you say soccer very often, except when you maybe are mocking Americans just a little? Because I know you do that on occasion, don't you?
Oh, I would never do such a thing. No, I don't really use the word soccer, but I quite enjoy using it then.
All right. You do say Nassel.
So maybe I'll do it some more.
I do love Nassel. I do love that. I don't think I can. Yeah. I can't steal that. I mean, that's a Ramble thing.
No, I think you should. I think you should take it on to the next level. It's meant for an American audience.
We don't talk old Nassel that much. We have a new Nassel, which is a very different thing. So we don't. I don't.
Sort of like the remake of RoboCop.
So yeah, exactly, something like that. Although I don't know. And the new one is because it's second division. There are some interesting storylines. The new Cosmos back, obviously, but I don't know that I could.
Yeah, that's big.
We talk about it, but I don't think I'm going to call it Nassel. I just can't do it. Anyway, let's talk Premier League, Luke. That's why you're here. Let's talk about yesterday's big match, the Monday match. Chelsea beating Manchester City. 1-0. And this is being heralded in some quarters as another Mourinho tactical masterpiece. Do you buy that?
I think I do, yeah. I think it was probably the performance of the season, given what Man City's home record has been like and how ruthless they've been and how many goals they've scored and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I would say that they set up really, really well, nullified City pretty successfully and hit them on the break very effectively, and I thought it was a pretty good all-round performance. And I thought Mourinho showed yet again that he's, one of the leading managers in the world, if not the leading manager. Now
it's funny that he has been able to sort of build this narrative where he has been in the past. He's been, he's parked the bus. I mean that's his thing, and he's made that sort of his own particular genius in a lot of ways, particularly when they're when his teams are going up against a high-powered attacking team, and yet when he does not park the bus, he gets that reflect. It's like an inverse genius. It's very interesting the way he's sort of manipulated us into being surprised and giving him more credit when he doesn't park the bus.
Yeah, the thing is that the British press love Mourinho. He can do no wrong in their eyes, and they will always lap up all the easy quotes he gives them and the entertainment they get from just doing their job by covering him. There's been a lot of talk this morning in the press about his so-called, in quotes, mind games, where he's talked about Chelsea not really being part of the title race and all that sort of thing. I mean, it's effectively just talking nonsense.
Yes.
And it's not really going to count as a mind game unless it really gets under the skin of Manuel Pellegrini or Arsene Wenger, which I probably suspect it won't. But he is very good at manipulating the press. He's very good psychologically. I mean, obviously we don't see the other side of that, which is what he's talking to his players about behind the scenes. But I can assume, we can all assume that it's part of a sort of wider strategy to take the pressure off them and to make them more successful by removing the expectation from them. But I mean, it was interesting what Mourinho said, but what was more interesting was what John Terry said, in my opinion, after the game, where he said, we worked really hard on one or two things all week leading up to this game, which you would expect. But he also said that we've shown that it can be done. We've shown that Man City can be beaten on their own patch and all this other stuff. And he was almost setting the gauntlet out, or throwing a gauntlet down, for other teams to go there and win, which could just be really important in the title race, because it won't just be what Chelsea does, it'll be what Man City does as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, and it's also interesting that when Mourinho is so sort of obvious, I suppose is the way to describe his comments about, we're not really title contenders. We're evolving all of that stuff is as you said, it's nonsense. And we can identify it as nonsense, and yet he won't really be. It's not as though he'll be criticized for it. It'll just be kind of chalked up to Mourinho being himself. But it's not. It's not subtle in a type of way that would actually have any kind of impact. I don't imagine.
You wouldn't have thought so. I mean, there's an outside chance it could have an impact on Pellegrini, who could get frustrated by it, and they've got a bit of a track record, those two. But it's not really going to get under the skin of Wenger. It's just one of those things that the press know the public identify with Mourinho, as far as he's a very popular figure. People know who he is. He sells football quite well. Mm-hmm. So they'll always leap on any quote he does, or he says, because he's got away with words, and also they love it because of easy quotes. And the same reason they sort of love Harry Redknapp, really.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really mean anything, as I've said, unless it gets under the skin of the opposing managers or players, who all will know what Mourinho's like. So I wouldn't have thought it would have too much of an impact, despite what the press want to tell you.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the lifespan of this little horse wordplay.
I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, the very idea that Chelsea is some sort of plucky underdog in this whole
right.
sort of race is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
This is a battle of three very wealthy teams and two spectacularly wealthy teams. And Mourinho's not. You know, he's just having a laugh. He's not. I don't think he even really take it seriously himself.
Yeah, more than anything else, it just it sets the fans of other clubs their teeth on edge when the world famous manager of an incredibly rich club like Chelsea, backed by an oligarch, says things like this. Yeah, it just makes the rest of the world sort of edgy. Though again, Mourinho is clearly very, very good at his job, and really what his job is putting his team out to be successful, and they were successful yesterday. But Manchester City, and this is interesting to me because of how much firepower they have, how many players they brought in over the last couple of years, and how much money they spent. One of the other talking points, if you want to flip it over, is that Fernandinho was missing. And Fernandinho is crucial, and et cetera, et cetera. If Manchester City, and I know Chelsea's a very good team, but if Manchester City is going to go on and win this thing, then one player's absence, even if it's a very good player, shouldn't make the difference. And maybe it doesn't against anybody else. I guess that's the point.
Yeah, I think that you've sort of gone halfway to answering your own question now. I think that Chelsea are a very good team, and they've got the personnel to be able to make that work. What they did is they defended deep and with confidence. And with a really high work rate, with the two screen midfield players in front of the back four, they were able to nullify Manchester City. Because John Terry's strengths, for example, are his leadership and his strength and his experience and stuff like that. And he defends really deep. He sort of reminds me of the old Inter defensive line, which used to sit very deep. He's confident enough to do that, and he won't get exposed with his lack of pace. And he can organise a team to such an extent that they can perform pretty admirably, quite close to their own goal, and then hit teams on the break very quickly with the sort of genius of Hazard and people like that. So it worked. As for the Fernandinho thing, I mean, that was an unfortunate thing for City, but it's clear to me that Toure and Fernandinho work in tandem, and if Toure wants to play in that midfield alongside someone that isn't Fernandinho, he needs to show himself to be much more adaptable than he was. Because he was pretty sort of negligent, in my view, of his work rate against such a good team. And Di Michaelis, bless him, is not a midfield player. I mean, I know he's experimented with playing in midfield, I think for Bayern here and there, but he's not really a midfield player. And so it just didn't really work for them in that area. I mean, interestingly enough, they had Jack Robert on the bench, who I know hasn't had an awful lot of football, but who is a specialist midfield player in that position. So you wonder what he needs to do to get a game. I mean, if I was Jack Rodwell this morning, I'd be thinking, well, he's played someone out of position ahead of me. What's my future at this club? If I were him, I'd be angling for a move in the summer.
And it would have to be in the summer now. We had the transfer window closing on Friday, and let me ask you.
Well, I heard that Manchester City blocked a loan move for him from Everton on deadline day. Now I don't know how true that is, but if that is true, I mean that's a bit rich to tell them you don't want anyone else to have him, but you don't want him yourself. It's a bit like a jilted lover.
That's very interesting, and as successful as Everton has been, they're not a challenge to City at this point. Speaking of the transfer window, I mean it felt very underwhelming. Nothing significant really happened. I mean, Fulham making moves is a sort of a headline that tells you what kind of window it was. And let me ask you, who was the most surprising inactive team for you in this particular transfer window? And yes, January is loaded with risk, and you overpay, and it really might not help you. But certainly, some of these teams could have used a little bit more help at this point.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you don't know what goes on behind the scenes. I mean, just because a team hasn't signed a bunch of players or has only signed one or two or whatever, it doesn't mean they haven't tried to sign players. And it becomes a bit of a bun fight, and everyone, it's almost like a self-feeding frenzy where the press, I don't know what it's like over your side of the water, but here it's very, very explosive in terms of media coverage, and it gets to the point where nothing could happen that would live up to the hype that's been bestowed upon it anyway. But it's difficult to say who should have moved and who didn't. I mean, there was talk of Liverpool signing Konoplyanka, who I think is a good player, but that didn't happen. But there are many reasons why a transfer wouldn't happen in January. And as you say, people can overpay and panic and all this other stuff. I think Fulham were right to strengthen. I think they need to. Well, Fulham basically needed to make a decision about whether they were going to try and go down fighting or they were just going to accept their relegation because, and they've chosen the former. I don't know whether it's going to work, but they really, really need to stop conceding goals, and that's an obvious point to make. But I mean, hopefully that some of their signings could go some way towards that.
I think that was particularly important based on the new ownership there. I think he had to make some kind of gesture to the fans that, I'm not just going to sit back and watch this. And he made a big investment. He doesn't want them to be relegated. That's very, very clear. So just to see him make some moves, whether it's loans like for Holtby or even the purchases that they made for Michiglu, that's obviously a step in the right direction. I just lost my thread there. I had a different thought, particularly as it related to the transfer window, and I've completely lost it at this point, and I apologize. I was going to take us in a bit of a different direction. Let's talk about Arsenal. Here it is, actually. Arsenal makes one move. I don't know if they made any other lesser moves, but they make one move that gets any coverage at all, and it's Kim Kallstrom. And he comes in and he's injured, and now there's kind of suffering I guess it's a PR hit, and it ultimately might not affect their form for quite some time. It was cover. But that actually shows you that, it can be a bad idea to make that kind of move in January because, I don't know that makes them look very good right now.
Well, I think it was one of those situations where they had the option to get him. They knew he was injured. They knew that his current parent club would pay as long as he remained injured, and it seemed to be a bit of a sort of, like a risk-free option. And Wenger seemed to sort of imply that, in months to come throughout the season, there'll be situations where other players might be injured, so he could cover them. But it is a bit of a strange one. I'm not really sure if Kim Kallstrom's the answer anyway. I don't really know of his quality. He hasn't played an awful lot recently. But I think it was just a case of getting bodies in for Wenger, and there was no other option available to him, and he saw that as a bit of a risk-free one. But it's not been a great PR thing, but I don't really think that he cares too much about that.
No, he probably shouldn't. It's just interesting to see sort of the Twitter explosion.
It's a good example of the
jokes.
sort of panic, because he did say it was the last day and he had no time to make a decision, so he just went for it.
Yeah.
Which does seem a little bit sort of scattergun in its approach, and something you wouldn't necessarily associate Wenger with. Although more recently he has sort of done those sorts of things. And I remember on deadline day he signed 2 or 3 players a while back, and it seemed a little bit like there was no joined up thinking behind it. But that's what a deadline does to people, I think.
All right, I'm up against it here with another guest coming on, but very, very quickly, Manchester United's loss to Stoke. Any particular things to glean out of that performance from United losing away to Stoke? I mean, Stoke makes it difficult, but it's still a troubling thing for Moyes at this point.
Yeah, very briefly, I think he played the attacking players at his disposal in slightly wrong positions, and I think he played Ashley Young when he shouldn't have done. And I think some of the players, especially towards the sort of rear guard of the team, aren't good enough. And they've also lost their aura of people being scared to play them, and that'll be difficult to get back.
Yep, there it is. Luke Moore from the world-famous Football Ramble joining us talking Premier League. Appreciate your time as always, Luke.
Thanks, Soccer Morning. Speak to you again soon.
All right. Let's take it to break. We'll come back with our friend Andy Edwards from Kansas City. We'll talk Sporting Kansas City, defending MLS champs, getting ready to defend their title. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Back on Soccer Morning, turning now to MLS. Let's talk about the defending champions, Sporting Kansas City, with our buddy Andy Edwards, who joins us now. Hi, Andy.
Jason, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? It's preseason. You got to be excited, right?
Yeah, I'm quite excited, although the weather today in Kansas City is about 10 times worse than it was for MLS Cup.
I don't believe that.
8 to 10 inches or snow today, so bring on that winter schedule, please.
All right, the snow maybe makes it worse, but I that experience is one that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Being out in the cold at Sporting Park for that. I mean, it was a great game. Well, it wasn't a great game. It was a dramatic game, and it was a good time. But it was damn cold, Andy. Really cold.
Yeah, as cold as it was for all of us sitting up there in the press box. I don't think anybody had a worse time with it that day than Jimmy Nielsen, though. The way he was kind of creaking around like an old man on the field and falling all over the place.
Well, that's one of the few places that Sporting Kansas City has changes heading into the 2014 season as they defend their title. And I think I'm going to start with sort of the approach of the club. Rob Heineman has never been a guy to sit on his hands when it comes to going out and getting help. And that's not always been successful, but obviously he put together a championship team last year. What is the approach and what has the thought process been heading into this campaign, and how much turnover are we really looking at for the MLS Cup champions?
Hey, I think it would be easy to look at what they've done this offseason and kind of the lack of activity and say, well, they're stagnating. They're satisfied with what they have, and they're going to remain with the status quo. But I don't think that's exactly what's going on behind the scenes. I know that there's been a handful of players that they've been chasing very, very actively. I think at one point late in the season last year and going into this offseason, they thought there was a serious chance of bringing Roger Espinoza back to MLS. And of course, they still hold his MLS rights at this point. Wigan go and fire Owen Coyle right around that same time when Espinoza was not playing at all for Wigan, and then they get in a new coach. He's become a regular in that team again, and so I think that's kind of gone back on the back burner for him again to come back to MLS. Obviously, he's getting games over there, and so he's not looking for a move at the moment. That would have been a huge move for Sporting Kansas City, obviously, adding a player of his quality to a team that's already defending champs. And so, they've addressed a couple of minor needs, if you will. They bring in Andy Greenebaum as a challenger for the top goalkeeper spot to go up against Eric Kronberg after Jimmy Nielsen retires. And they bring in Sal Zizzo from the Portland Timbers as a nice depth player on the right wing. They know they're going to lose Graham Zusi for a month and a half or so to the World Cup, and so somebody that can come in for 3 or 4 league games, that can play a couple of Open Cup games during that time. They've obviously got CONCACAF Champions League knockout stage to come starting on March 12th, and then they've got the group stage again in August and September and October later this year. And so they're going to play. I think I did the math the other day. It's going to be anywhere between 48 and 60 games, depending on how deep they go in Champions League this spring, how deep they can go into Open Cup, and then they're going to have obviously 4 more Champions League games in the summer, and then the playoffs. So it's going to be an insane year, and throw a World Cup on top of it. So I think they're going to use a lot of guys this year, where maybe Peter Vermes kind of stuck to a top 12 to 16 guys the last couple seasons. He's going to have to dig deeper down 17 to 22 and find a lot of minutes from those guys.
And obviously we know that the issues with trying to do that in MLS are that the money's just not there typically to get that deep into a roster with any significant quality. I mean, obviously Sal Zizzo is good cover as a wing player, but where else are you mining to get players who are good enough to help you, compete in all of those competitions that you mentioned? And again, you mentioned the World Cup absences, and we're talking about Graham Zusi, we're talking about Matt Beasler. I mean, these are key guys that they're going to potentially Benny Feilhaber, although it's a little up in the air with him. These are key guys to this team.
Yeah, Peter Vermes is, one of the things that has been one of his foundational values, if you will, for building this team the way he has, is they want depth in all those positions, and they want it to be young guys that have come up through their system. And so they've got a handful of guys that have been around with this team now for 2, 3, 4 years, Talking guys like a Kevin Ellis, who's 22 years old, was the second ever homegrown player in the history of the club at 19 years old. I think he's only played in one league game his entire career, but he's been with this team and training with them for 4 or 5 years. And so he's very much familiar with the system, what Peter Vermes wants from him. And he's a player that I've seen personally over the past few years in training, a huge improvement. They've got Ike Opara, who for me was probably the most consistent and best defender on the team all season long, even above Matt Besler, who was in and out of the team with a couple of injuries, national team, what have you. And Ike Opara stepped in seamlessly in his first year with Sporting Kansas City, was a huge surprise. And so that takes a huge burden off of Peter Vermes' shoulders to go out and try and find a third center back from the foreign market, have to spend a bunch more money on a player like that to pick up those minutes when Matt Besler does go off to the World Cup, because we all know he's going to be gone for that. And then they've got the huge stable of forwards up top. They've got Sooney Saad, they've got Dom Dwyer, they've even got Teal Bunbury. I think CJ Sapong is going to play quite a bit wide on the left side this year, at least while Graham Zusi is with the team. And so they've got plenty of options up top. And then the midfield, that's the one area where they're really thin at. And I think that's why they obviously targeted Espinoza. Peter Vermes has said that they went heavily to the tune of $40 million after Michael Bradley, before he ended up in Toronto. So, they've obviously, that's the one area that they feel that they need to get somebody in. I wouldn't be surprised to see them still bring someone in. I don't think it's going to be a marquee signing at this point. Obviously, the transfer window is closed in Europe already, and so a lot of guys are going to be a little bit more hesitant to make a move at this time of the year. But they've got Mikey Lopez, who was a first-round draft pick last year, never saw the field in league play. He's got a full year of training and experience within the system under his belt. He's only 20 years old. They've also got another young guy named Christian Duke, who grew up in Kansas City, trained with the first team through his late teens and early 20s, and they drafted him last year. He went on loan to Orlando, played very, very well down there and through that affiliation with them. And so, guys are going to get a lot of chances to step up this year, I think, for Sporting Kansas City, because like you said, Feilhaber, potentially Zusi, Besler off to the World Cup. There's going to be minutes, like I said earlier, for everybody. And once those come, they just have to step up and kind of take hold of it. We've seen it with the Galaxy the last couple of years, where they've, Bruce Arenas had to go really deep into his bench, and I think they'll be better for that in the long run, getting those guys some minutes early on.
I want to get to a midfield experiment that's happening in preseason here in a second, but Ben on Twitter wants to know who you think will get the captain's armband.
I think the choice that makes the most sense would be Matt Besler. Okay. Hometown guy. He's been with the team now for 6 or 7 years. Definitely one of the leaders on the team, and somebody that I think a lot of guys look to for leadership and to kind of guide that team. So I'd be pretty surprised if it doesn't go to Besler. I think while he's away at the World Cup, it probably goes to somebody like Paulo Nagamura. Would probably be a pretty good kind of vice captain, if you will.
Speaking of that midfield experiment I mentioned, I follow enough Kansas City guys. I follow a lot of Kansas City guys. I guess that just kind of happened on Twitter. And some of the talk has been that Claudio Bielsa has been used as an attacking midfielder. Now, the first thing that occurs to me is that it sounds like they're trying to turn him into Diego Valeri. Is that anywhere close to reality?
I think him playing there the first 2 preseason games against FC Tucson and the Portland Timbers on Saturday, I think that probably has more to do with just the guys that they have in camp at the moment. Obviously, Benny Feilhaber was off with the national team. Graham Zusi was off with the national team. And so they didn't really have anybody that could play that position effectively. And so, I think it's half they need somebody to play in that spot just off behind the striker in these 2 games, and then half Peter Vermes probably has a little bit of curiosity, what he could do in that position. I think there's some definite positives and negatives to Claudio Bielsa playing in an attacking midfield role. I think on the good side, it gets him more involved in the game. It gets him a chance to get on the ball more and show his ability to pass, which he surprisingly in the second game that I got to watch, he looked very active, and he looked like he fit into that position very well, and he was quick on the ball, and that's one thing that you could say that at times Benny Feilhaber has a problem with, being a little bit slow and ponderous on the ball in the attacking third. But Claudio Bielor looked pretty seamlessly for him to kind of transition into that position. And like I said, it got him more involved with the game, and that was a huge problem with him last year, playing as the lone center forward. Oftentimes he'd be stuck in kind of a box of two backs and two defensive midfielders, all on his own, left to fend for himself, but with very little service. And so now just dropping him a little bit deeper gets him on the ball more. And I think also he's going to play quite a few games as a center forward, I think. And so just give him the different perspective of the field. See it through the eyes of that guy that's supposed to be feeding him the chances, feeding him the ball. And maybe he can pick up just a little bit more from that. But I don't think he's a long-term that's a solution for Claudio Bielor. I think he's still a center forward. He's the best center forward that they have on the team, in my opinion, just a pure finisher of the ball. If he gets a half chance, he typically puts it away. So I think he'll end up there, but it's interesting, and it'll be something to kind of keep an eye on. And, it would be just another option. Like I said, the midfield is the thin part for Sporting Kansas City, so he just kind of gives them another option in there.
It's interesting, particularly the way that Peter Vermes used or did not use Claudio Bielor down the stretch in the playoffs last season. It seemed that he was sort of the odd man out for whatever reason. We all knew he was the best finisher of the group, but that didn't necessarily seem to play into Vermes' decisions on who to start in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think a lot of that late in the season. He picked up a couple of injuries in August, September, early October. He would come back from those probably a little bit too quickly, and he would kind of re-injure himself. And so he was, at that point, not fully healthy. He wasn't fully fit. He wasn't able to go more than 50 or 60 minutes at that point. And so Dom Dwyer ended up getting a lot of those games from the start. Teal Bunbury picked up a handful as well. And so it was just kind of it was unfortunate timing, I think, for Claudio Bielor to not be fit going into the playoffs. And so a lot of people kind of compared it to Omar Bravo in 2011 when that kind of fallout happened, of a very, very similar situation with him, an injury late in the season. He didn't start in the playoffs. But like I said, I think once we get to March 8th, when they open up at Seattle, I think Claudio Bielor is the starting center forward. I just think that your best opportunity to score goals, and this team is going to, if last year showed us anything and we learned from it, they're going to struggle to create chances from time to time. And so you need a guy that when he gets that half chance, with only a semi-decent chance on goal, you need somebody that's going to put it away. And I think Claudio Bielor is the best guy for that. I think Dom Dwyer's got a huge upside. He's obviously got a very, very high motor, and he's more likely to pull off something spectacular on his own than Claudio Bielor. But Bielor just seems to be so consistent and so technically good when it comes to finishing. You've also got Soony Saad, who can play through the center, Cedric Tapong, Teal Bunbury. But for me, it's probably going to be Bielor. I would expect him to get probably 22 to 26 games at center forward. Okay,
very interesting stuff. The last thing I'll ask you here is, look, coming off an MLS Cup, the first for the Kansas City franchise in 13 years. It is obviously a great season, kind of the culmination of the new project, obviously the Sporting brand and everything else. Heading into 2014, and per Vegas, whatever this means, the Sporting is a 5-1 favorite, right behind the LA Galaxy. What's the feeling? They weren't the best team in the regular season in the Eastern Conference last year, and the Eastern Conference has gone through an upheaval. Lots of movement in terms of players coming in, particularly for teams that were behind Sporting. Is there any sense that they've lost their edge, that they're maybe not the best team in the East anymore? And again, they weren't in the regular season anyway.
Yeah, you mentioned all the moves that the East teams have made. I think if they're not, obviously they have to be considered right there at the top and in the conversation. But if they're not, I think it's more for the moves that those teams have made, those teams improving themselves versus Sporting regressing. I do think it'll be a really interesting year for Sporting, though, because like I mentioned earlier, they have all those games, and Peter Vermes is really going to have to juggle the lineup a lot, and then he'll also have to deal with kind of that championship hangover where complacency can easily creep in. They've never been in this position, this group of players, before. They've obviously been together for a while, but they've never been through, we are the champions, we're going to get everybody's best shot. Every time we step out on the field, we have to defend our trophy. And also just having the mindset of, well, we've been there, now how do we do it again and not feel comfortable with it? So it's going to be a whole new challenge for Peter Vermes, something I'm sure that he welcomes. But this has been an incredibly hungry group of players over the last 3 years since the rebranding of Sporting Kansas City happened, since they opened that brand new stadium. Nothing that I've ever seen shows me that anybody's going to kind of rest on their laurels and become lax as far as the 2014 season. So I'd expect pretty much business as usual from those guys, because Peter Vermees will be the first guy, if he's not seeing 100% effort, he will pull somebody aside and he will tell them flat out to their face and say, look, man, you have to step it up. You're not giving me enough. You're not going to play if you don't really bring it for me every single day. So I don't think he will let that complacency creep in too much.
Very interesting season coming up for Sporting Kansas City, defending MLS Cup champions. Lots of fronts to play on, lots of competitions to go to try and win, and obviously dealing with potential World Cup absences. That's Andy Edwards. Go follow him. What's your handle, Andy? I don't pay attention to handles, so I can't remember it off the top of my head. What's your handle on Twitter?
Andy Ed MLS.
There you go. And Andy also covers the weird and wonderful at MLS.com, soccer.com. Is that what we're going to call that? What do you call that?
Yeah, we'll call it our version of Kickers.
Okay. Okay. It's like Dirty Tackle Light, which is what Kickers was. So there you go. Andy Edwards joining us to talk Sporting Kansas City. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, our friend Eric Gomez will join us. We'll talk Carlos Vela refusing or not playing for Mexico in the World Cup in 2014. Chicharito didn't move either. We'll talk about that. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Hello, Miami.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Our friend Eric Gomez joins us now to talk a little bit of Mexican soccer. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. It's been an interesting show. I've managed to anger most of the soccer fans in Miami today, so that's something I've done. I've accomplished something today. We'll see how that plays out. All right, Eric.
That's good. I'm happy for you.
We're here to talk about Mexico. I'm going to start with the national team. The big story last couple of days: Carlos Vela meeting with FMF officials, and ultimately the word is he will not play for Mexico this summer. Is this? I mean, look, he wasn't in the team. I guess it's not surprising he won't be there, but I think we all expected this to get fixed eventually.
Yeah, I think so too. And this is the 7th time he's said no over the last 3 years. That's, I think it's surprising that they keep going back to that well. I mean, he's never outright said, I want to come back, I want to play for the Mexican national team. This has always been one-sided in the sense that no matter what national team manager has been in charge, no matter who we've had as the national team director down here in Mexico, those contacts have always come up unilaterally, in the sense that Mexican officials go to Spain or they get on the phone and try to talk to Vela, and Vela always comes up with the same answer, saying that he's not 100% physically, mentally able to come play for Mexico, which we all know is it's politics. He's just trying to stay away from the Mexican national team for whatever reason right now, and I think it's gotten to the point where a guy like Miguel Herrera, who's the current national team manager, is a no-nonsense guy. He spent 30 minutes with him in Madrid last Sunday, and what came of that conversation is a flat-out no, and a flat-out we're not going to try again from Herrera. So that's where we stand right now, and I think that's, to me, that was the most surprising thing to hear. I mean, it's been so long since Vela's played for Mexico, but I didn't really realize that we had gone through this situation 7 different times.
It's pretty amazing. 2011, the last time he appeared in a Mexico shirt, if I'm not mistaken. And as you said, It's not as though Vela is saying, I want to come back, or, I'm thinking about it, or the door is open. It's been everybody else. It's been certainly from the Mexican standpoint. And then Giovanni Dos Santos has sort of been the guy saying, we've got to get Carlos back. We've got to get Carlos back. What impact does this have? Look, I mean, you could make the argument that they're not necessarily going to be significantly worse off. I mean, he's a very, very good player. He would make them better. He might not make or break them. I guess that's the question: is how much of an impact does this have on their chances in Brazil and sort of the feeling around the team?
And that's a common argument. How much does Vela actually impact Real Sociedad, for instance? You can say that he makes them a lot better team when he's on form, but he's not the only player on that team. They've got Griezmann, they've got Seferovic, they've got a lot of other great offensive players on that team that make that club click, and I think you can make that same argument for Mexico, whether it's a guy like Giovanni Dos Santos, who plays a very similar position to Vela, just on the other side of the pitch, or whether it's Chicharito when he's on form, or whether it's Oribe Peralta, or whether it's a guy like Raul Jimenez, who has gotten significantly better for Mexico. Is Vela going to be that guy that's going to take Mexico to that quarterfinal match, to that semifinal match? I don't think so. Is he going to be a guy that his not being there is going to make Mexico from a round of 16 team to a group stage team? I don't think so either. I think Mexico's hopes in that World Cup were never tied to Carlos Vela. As you mentioned, I mean, he's a great player. He was going to make them better anyhow. But how much better? I don't know. He's not really a guy that has defined the way that Mexico plays in the past. I know that style has changed significantly now that Herrera's on board. But still, he's not that type of player who's going to put a match on his shoulders and change it for the better, the way Messi does, the way that Cristiano Ronaldo does, the way that a guy like Luis Suarez might have that impact. Vela is not that player. He's a really good team player within a system. So, now the question is, would it really have been worth it? Because, as I mentioned, Mexico switched away from a very, very, very set system that they had pretty much been working on since 2007. Now they're going to a 5-3-2 with Miguel Herrera. It's a whole different change, and the guys that he's really trusted in to execute that system are Club America players, which, as we all know, was his last club. How much was he going to fit in that system? I don't know. But still, I think the main issue is that he was never going to be a guy that was going to put Mexico over the top.
It's interesting from a meta standpoint whether or not this is. I don't think it's going to be a distraction for Herrera. He's very committed. He's obviously got his system. Whether clearly every coach wants the best players available, and Carlos Vela is on that list for Mexico. But he can sort of push all of this aside in the build up to the World Cup if they continue to play as well as they did against South Korea. And obviously that's a friendly and it might not mean that much, but you score 4 goals, people are going to forget that Carlos Vela could have made them better in Brazil.
Yeah, I think the issue with that friendly is more or less Miguel Herrera is continuing to impress as Mexico manager, and I know that he hasn't really faced anybody yet, but the teams that he has faced, and this was an oft-repeated criticism of Mexico. No matter who was managing, they were always going to have these second-level, third-level friendlies against teams that aren't really cutting it in the United States. Some has done a great job of making the Mexican national team and themselves a lot of money in the process, but they haven't really gotten them A-level opponents to play, especially in non-FIFA dates in the United States. So how much can a friendly against a B Korea team, how much can that tell you? Not really a lot.
No.
But still, I think it's refreshing for Mexico to see a guy like Miguel Herrera come in, no holds barred. And his first game against Finland, they score 4 goals. New Zealand, they completely beat up on those guys over a 2-leg stretch. And now they start 2014 with a similar performance against Korea. So that's enticing to the Mexican public to say, we might not have Vela, but at least now we have a manager who knows what he's doing, who trusts in his system, and is going to use the right players in that system to try and get those results. How far is that going to get them in Brazil? I have no idea, but still, they don't have an easy group ahead of them, but they don't have the most difficult group ahead of them. I think the common wisdom would state that Mexico's not going to be that team that is going to break through into the quarterfinals as they've been trying to do since 1994. Conventionally speaking, I think you would say that they're probably going to face Spain in the round of 16 or Holland.
Yeah.
That doesn't bode well for them.
No, clearly, with all the, I think from an outsider's perspective, they get to the round of 16, they go out to Holland or Spain. It's, considering everything that's happened in the last couple of years, that's a pretty good result for Mexico. But, you only get one shot every 4 years. You want to maximize it. It would still be a disappointment, ultimately not to break through to the quarterfinals. Another European-based player from Mexico who will definitely be in the team in Brazil is Chicharito Hernandez. And he had the opportunity, or there was some thought that he might leave Manchester United in January, potentially for Monaco. Whether or not there was anything to that, I don't know. But certainly there's a question over how much playing time he's going to get there. He's made some spot appearances. He's been in the League Cup and the FA Cup. Is there concern in Mexico that he decided to stick it out there at Manchester United?
I think the interesting bit here is that Javier Hernandez has the same agent as Carlos Vela. And that guy is Eduardo Hernandez. He is probably the most powerful player agent in Mexico. He went on Fox Sports yesterday and he told us that, Vela's transfer status, for instance, is not an issue for him despite him missing the World Cup, because everybody in the world knows who Carlos Vela is. That's a direct quote from Eduardo Hernandez. So, the guy has faith in his clients. And I think that he has been that person behind Hernandez telling him, you're not as valuable as a starter in, say, Valencia or whatever Serie A team wants to buy you, or whatever League One team wants to buy you, as you are as a super sub at Manchester United. He's clearly thinking about the player's market value and about contract negotiations and that sort of thing. And I do think that he has had a negative impact on an impressionable guy like Hernandez, who, by all accounts, really loves being a Manchester United player. And his mentality is, I'm going to break through eventually, despite the fact that he has, a couple of guys by the name of Robin Van Persie and Wayne Rooney, and sometimes even Danny Welbeck in front of him. Yeah. How that affects Mexico still remains to be seen, because he has been a super sub for United for the last 3 years, and his form has varied greatly for Mexico. Yeah. So I think the issue is what Javier Hernandez, Mexico, is going to get for that World Cup. Are they going to get a circa 2011 Gold Cup, 2012 pre-hexagonal Chicharito, or are they going to get that 2013 model who was just absolutely dreadful in front of goal?
Yeah. How much of that, just you talk about marketability and an agent's influence, that's got to be about commercial deals as well. I mean, Chicharito, giant face in Mexico. If he's playing for Manchester United, his profile is much bigger.
Yeah, they're following the Hugo Sanchez model. Hugo Sanchez was really that first athlete in Mexico that exploited commercial deals in the 80s, and he was a pitchman for absolutely everything, and most of that had to do with the fact that he was a Real Madrid player. Now, Hugo was never a super sub for Real Madrid. He was the unquestioned starter. He was a guy that won 5 Golden Boots in Spain, so the situation is obviously different from Chicharito. But again, this is a guy that has scored over 50 goals for Manchester United in all competitions.
Sure.
And I think that, Moyes is looking at a guy like Hernandez and saying, well, you know what, we're not the best team right now, but at least I have options on that bench. If I need somebody to be able to pull out a result, I can always count on Hernandez being there. I think that's the role that he's kind of been called up to fill. He's kind of a Solskjaer type guy that managers haven't really trusted in for 90 minutes, but they'll trust him for 15, 20 minutes to try and save a result and get Manchester United back on track. They have a lot. They have a treasure trove of problems before they can even think about selling a guy like Chicharito or giving him more playing time. As we move along, the only competitions that they have available to them right now are the Premier League and the Champions League, and who knows how long they're going to be in the Champions League. And we say that with kind of a smile, knowing full well that they face Olympiacos of Greece. But they've bowed out to some pretty bad teams in other competitions. So, they've shocked us before. They'll shock us again, I think. And that might not bode well for a guy like Chicharito who isn't getting those minutes. As we move past Brazil 2014, he has a really great opportunity, I think, that if he dazzles with Mexico, if he scores 3-4 goals in 4 games, then he's going to have a lot of offers on the table, and they're not going to be from teams like Monaco or Fiorentina or Valencia. They might be from top teams that want his services, like, say, Arsenal.
It'd be interesting to see. Before I let you go, very, very quickly here, Eric, in the Copa Lib tonight, Morelia down in Colombia against Independiente sent to Santa Fe with a 2-1 aggregate lead. Your thoughts on whether or not Morelia can get that job done? I mean, the away goal looms, but they have the lead.
Mexican teams have been really spotty of late in those pre-Libertadores series. And I think Morelia did their former manager, a huge disservice by firing him, a guy by the name of Carlos Bustos, an Argentine who won the Mexican Cup for Morelia. This is a team that hasn't had a lot of success historically. They've only won 2 titles, 1 league title and that aforementioned cup title. So to fire him 2 days before the Copa Lib starts was a bit of a shock, to say the least. And now I think that a 1-0 rather against them has them bow out of the cup. So they need to go all out and try to get that result. But I do see them as being a stronger team than this Colombian team that they're facing. So for the sake of Mexico and also for the company that I work for,
there you go.
Here's hoping that they make it and we get 3 Mexican teams in the Copa Lib so we can show those South Americans what CONCACAF's all about.
CONCACAF or Mexico, whichever one, sure. Mexico's repping CONCACAF most of the time these days, isn't it? That's just the way it goes. Eric Gomez, Fox is his Twitter handle. Go follow him, covering Mexican soccer. Eric, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for the time.
All right, let's move along. I'm going to open up the phone lines. We got a little bit less than 10 minutes here. 347-756-6276. I'm taking a beating from people in Miami. That's fine. Look, if you have information for me, you want to make your case, I'm happy to open up the floor. All I'm saying, and maybe I expressed it poorly, and I know my job is to talk into a microphone. That's pretty bad if I can't express myself. But my basic statement here is there's got to be some doubt. That's all. I'm not saying there's not a movement down there, and the Miami Ultras are probably angry with me right now. But there's got to be some doubt. Does David Beckham solve all problems? This is it. I'm being told that Miami is very much like Toronto. Okay, I fail to see those comparisons, but whatever. Toronto was not guaranteed to be a success. No, of course not. Of course not. Nobody is guaranteed to be a success. Nobody knew Seattle was going to get 40,000, 35,000 when they opened up. The only sure thing we thought we had was Portland. They were already drawing 10,000 for lower division games. Maybe Miami's got all of the ingredients to be an overwhelming success. And maybe I'm completely wrong. And it's not that I don't think it can happen. It's that I haven't yet been convinced that it's going to be a home run. Not to mix our sports metaphors, but it is. 347-756-6276. You have 7 minutes to get in to tell me why Miami is going to be a smashing success in MLS. Whether it's David Beckham, whether it's the soccer savvy of the city, which I identified. Again, I said, this is a town that watches soccer on TV in large numbers, in larger numbers than most American cities, except for maybe San Diego, another town that people doubt can be an MLS market for a lot of reasons. One of them being Tijuana, which I forgot to ask Eric Gomez about. Tijuana's form, not the greatest right now. Stephen Brandt on Twitter, and I'm just relaying this. Jason, Miami is going to be another epic failure. If they wanted to put money into a failing club, do something about Chivas. Well, the money that's going into Miami isn't going to be going. It's not the same anyway. Maybe move Chivas. Is that what we want? Want Chivas USA moved? I just want Chivas USA out of Jorge Vergara's hands. I don't know that it can't not work in LA. I think they need to get out of the StubHub Center. Stop being the renters. Stop being subordinate to the LA Galaxy in their own building. But maybe he can work somewhere else in LA. But Jorge Vergara is clearly not the guy to make it happen. When it comes to Miami, again, it's a fait accompli that Miami gets another MLS team. And I'm even willing to suggest, even willing to buy a little bit, that the Fusion might have succeeded if they had been given a couple more years. That some of what happened with the Fusion wasn't just about their failure in that market. It was about MLS and their cash position. And it was just easiest to pull the plug on the Fusion and the Mutiny. I'm willing to buy into that line of thinking. Not everybody buys it. 310, you're on the air.
Hey, Jason, this is Dave from LA.
What's up, man?
I think the Miami FC or Miami United by Beckham's going to be successful because if you look at the Fusion, they're located in Fort Lauderdale.
Okay.
And that's at least a good driving distance away from the majority of the fans of football and soccer. Yeah,
the stadium location is absolutely key. You've got a very good point there. That's something that people maybe aren't completely aware of with the Fusion, that there was some issues with being a Miami team based in Fort Lauderdale. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this would be a real Miami football club, and I think Beckham and LeBron James, all this money being pumped into it, I think MLS is a lot different now in 2014 compared to 98.
Yes. Yeah. No, there's a lot of good points there. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say that. So I just think, Miami is probably a city that, needs, like a little extra cash, a little extra like spotlight to get it really, jumping out and going. And I think Beckham and all his partners, they're not going to invest in something that's, that doesn't have a 5-10 year plan. So okay. I think this would be pretty good. I think it's possible to be like another LA Galaxy, another TFC maybe.
Wow.
So, what are your thoughts?
That's pretty big. That's pretty lofty. Look, I see all of the ingredients there. Again, it's really just Miami as a market and the difficulty sports have in that city. Now, I think it would be, as you pointed out, the Fusion based in Fort Lauderdale, not really a Miami team, despite being called that. There's some issue there. I guess it would be wrong then to say, well, the Fusion failed, therefore the new Miami team will fail. Those things aren't necessarily directly connected. But it is fair to question whether or not the momentum will stay with this team for a long period of time. I'm not talking about year one. I think that you do fine in year one. Again, depending on where they put this stadium. They maybe do fine in year two. I mean, part of that's about what kind of team you put on the field and how they play and who the names are. Year 3, 4, 5, 10. Is this team going to be among the successful franchises that we've seen come in? Look, for whatever you can say about Portland and Seattle, we don't expect them to be taking a significant attendance hit anytime in the near future because of what they put on the field. I mean, because of the standard they've already set. I think that's the issue and it's the same issue that's going to happen in Atlanta because that's coming too. These are just towns where for whatever reason, sports fans lose interest or they decide to go watch on television instead of going to the park. And TV matters, and TV is important to MLS, but if you don't have a full stadium to present on television, that's a problem, right?
That's true. Last thought is, so I remember TFC before it was about to join. There was big hype on it too. But all of us know TFC didn't go well for like the last 5-6 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think Miami Fusion, even if it doesn't do well the first couple of years, I think MLS is going to keep it afloat. And
they can't. Well, they can't afford to quit on Miami again. Look, I think the stadium. Thanks for the call, man. I got to get out of here, but I think if they build a stadium, that is already a massive step forward from where the Fusion were and where so many MLS 1.0 teams were. That's a huge thing. So that gives you some permanence in the market. This is our own building. Whatever else happens there, high school football, lacrosse, whatever else you do to justify the existence of the stadium, having a soccer stadium is a big boost. Therefore, MLS can say, for however long it takes, we're sticking with this. And again, they can't afford to quit on Miami a second time. In fact, I don't think MLS can afford to be folding teams at any point in the near future. This has got to be consistent momentum. People are calling. Unfortunately, I ran out of time. I apologize if you didn't get in. I may open up the phone lines again tomorrow, depending on what's happening. We can open up the phone lines again tomorrow. If you have pro Miami thoughts, I want to hear them. I do. I want to have this conversation. I don't think it's not going to work, and I just need to be convinced. Convince me. If you care at all about what I think, convince me. Please go to iTunes, give us a rating and a review. Follow us on Twitter, Soccer Morning. iTunes, I just said that. Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio. What else? NASN.TV, and we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.
Back in the days on the boulevard, I landed. We used to kick routines and the presence was fitting. It was I, the abstract, and me, the 5 footer.